Okay, welcome to our final bark shading video. We are going to put these things together. We have been working on making the pieces of this foot and making the pieces of this hand holding a whetstone. And these are photocopies. This is my mock-up of the project, and we are going to make the collaged version of our drawings. So this is what I have. I've got a scissors. I've got a utility knife. This is exactly the kind that we have from school. I brought it from school for that reason. I've got a thick metal straight edge. I have the stack of these. Many of them I pre-cut because this would be a very long, boring video if you had to watch me cut 15. So we're only going to cut a couple of them. I have some glue sticks and I have some black paper, okay? So this is what we need. And these are not originals. I have photocopied the ones that I drew in the videos that you've been watching because I want to leave the originals up on my board so that people can compare theirs to mine if they're having difficulty, and that's been helpful to some students. So in order to preserve those, I have made photocopies. The photocopier is not particularly sensitive, so these are also touched up a little bit with pencil in areas that you just couldn't see the line or whatever, because when I match these up, I'm going to need all of that information. Okay, so here's what we've got. We've got the photocopy version of the bark section, and then we have our drawing. And because mine are photocopies, I don't have to deal with graphite getting smudged, but I'm going to try to talk about how to deal with that as we go along. And actually, I have some scrap paper here. Here it is. That I can pull out when we get ready to cut these with a knife. Okay, we don't need the photocopied part of the section. So we're gonna first do a rough cut with the scissors. And we're just gonna put this photocopied section to the side and keep the graphite drawing. Okay, now if I were going to cut these by scissors, I would still rough cut them again. I don't want to do this if I'm going to cut with the knife because it's actually less efficient. But here's how you would cut with scissors. You want to make as few cuts as possible. So when you're making a lot of cuts, you have room for error. Like that's how you get kind of stray edges. I'm exaggerating a lot, but you can slightly move your scissors. So you want to make a really long stroke. You want to put the piece of paper as far into the scissors as you possibly can. Now the trick here is that we want to cut off this little edge, but no more. We only want to cut off this black edge. This is hard to do with the scissors, but I'm going to try. So I'm going to put it in the edge of the scissors, and I'm going to very carefully cut, not all the way to the end. Cutting to the end can kind of make a mess of the paper right here depending on your scissors. This scissors doesn't even want to close all the way at the end. But if I did have one, sometimes it makes a little rip right here in the paper. So you don't want to cut all the way to closed. You want to cut most of the way and then readjust the scissors. Okay, so this is what it would look like again. Now I have my scissors very carefully lined up with the inside edge of these black lines. I could try to cut backwards, and I could try to put the black line to my left and cut along that way. That would also be a strategy. But I don't love doing this. I just don't have the control that I would otherwise have with a knife. So I rough cut with the scissors, but I love the knife because I can use a straight edge and it's not as reliant on my coordination or how well I've lined things up. Okay, so I'm going to primarily teach you to do this with a knife, and if you're doing this in class, this is great practice because there are some things that you just can't cut without a knife. Thick cardboard, things like that, you can't cut that stuff with a scissor, so you need a utility knife, you need a blade. So I'm going to review how to use a blade like this. This one folds for safety. It doesn't lock folded, but it does fold so that if it falls off the table or gets put in a toolbox or something, there's not a raw edge of a blade sticking out that I could put my hand on or that could cut something else, okay? When I open the blade, if you hear that snap, that means that it is locked. And the reason that it locks is because we don't want it to bend back down. If I were to unlock this, and let's say it's not locked all the way and I start using it, this could close on my fingers, this could do all kinds of unpredictable things. So we want the knife to be rigid. We also want our blade to be sharp. If the blade seems like it's getting dull, we want to replace it because a dull blade could get hung up. It can do unexpected things. We always want to be able to predict the behavior of our knife, which is why we want it in a rigid position with a sharp blade that we're expecting to cut very smoothly. If I want to fold my knife back again, I'm going to push this little button, and you can see that there's a scoop in the black part of the handle of the knife, and that's so I can push the silver part down and it releases this hook mechanism inside the knife. It lets go of the lock, and then it lets me put this back. We never want to leave a knife on the table like this. We always want to close it before we put it down on the table and discontinue use. Just like with the scissors, we would never want to leave it open on the table. We would always want to close it because that's going to be a lot safer. Okay, freak accidents can happen. I've had cuts and emergency room visits with both of these kinds of tools as an older, capable person. So you never know, always be safe. Okay, I'm going to show you how to replace the blade. Just so you know, I have put carbide blades in at least most of these knives because the carbide blades stay much sharper, much longer, and that way we're not having to replace blades all the time, which means that you have an exposed blade, you've got to dispose of it, it's, you know, a safety hazard, and just a lot for a teacher to keep an eye on. So I can turn this blade twice. This is a trapezoidal shaped blade, and it's sharp all the way along, so it has two sharp edges, one on this side, one on this side. And so I can flip it before it has to be replaced and still have a sharp edge. We got some warnings on this side, but on this side, there's a little diagram that shows you exactly what I'm about to do. So it has this little trigger. I'm gonna pull this trigger back. So I'm disengaging the safety lock that keeps this thing from falling out when I do this, okay? So I have to know. And then if I pull on this little hole, so there's a cutout, in the blade housing, and that lets me get my finger in here and put a little bit of pressure and pull out this little hook. So you can see that this trigger, when it's engaged, is holding that hook in place so that I can't pull this out. But when I disengage the lock, the hook will let me come out. And then here, this shows me the blade. I can tell by looking at it that I think this blade has already been turned, but I'll still show you how to do it. If the ones that we have in class say DeWalt carbide, that means that your blade is a carbide blade and it should last about 10 times longer than a regular steel blade. A steel blade, you cut with it 3 or 4 times and it's done. And it's dull after that, and it will rip your paper and cause all kinds of problems. So I'm gonna flip this. It's got 2 little divots here, and that matches the shape of the upper part of the blade. So when we put this in here, we make sure that it's in the right place because the blade is fitting inside those 2 nodes. It's also butting up against this right here. There's like a ridge right here that the blade is sitting up against, okay? So if it doesn't feel like it's fitting in there snugly, then you've done something wrong and you want to reevaluate. Now that I flipped the blade, I want to push this back up. This little trigger button automatically re-engages, and now I flip the blade. And if I start cutting with this and I think it feels dull, then I certainly need to replace it. Okay, that's how we're gonna use a knife. Now, the next thing that we need is a cutting tool. So we need a metal cutting tool. This is a straight edge. It doesn't have to have numbers on it for my purposes. All I'm gonna do is line this up with the edge of this line, and then I'm gonna cut with the blade. So I don't need the measurements for this, but typically what you would use for this does have measurement on it, because you're usually measuring and then cutting in most applications of this kind of tool. So I'm gonna leave it up just because that seems to make sense. I wanna make sure that this is thick enough that when I put my blade against it, it's not gonna jump over. I do not want the blade to end up here, okay? I want the blade to stay outside of the center part of this ruling mechanism, okay? So I wanna make sure that this is a little bit thick. I would say this is an eighth of an inch thick. That's plenty thick for what we need. If it were a 16th or the type of ruler that you would get maybe at a school supply store or something a little less hefty, then I would worry, actually, because then your knife can jump. I also want this to be as wide as I can find. I like this one. It's about like 2.5 inches, I would say, wide. I haven't measured it actually, but I feel really comfortable that I can put my fingers up here in between the two sides, and I can have a lot of leverage. If I had a smaller ruler, let's see, I have one here. Like here's a school ruler. It's a little bit hard to see because it's clear, but this is what I just happen to have laying around to make a comparison. But you can see that if I put my hand on here to hold it down, my fingers have to be really close to this edge. I don't like that. I want to have a little bit of space. And if I do this, then I'm not really holding the ruler down. This also can demonstrate, this isn't thick enough. If I put this blade up against here, it can too easily come up this ridge and get onto the top. I also don't want to use a plastic ruler or wooden ruler, because if my blade is sharp, like it should be, it is going to very easily cut into this, and I can cut away at the plastic. Now that's a little bit dangerous, but it's also problematic because I want to make a straight edge, and if this edge might get cut away and become not straight, then I potentially could lose my straightness of my cut. And I care about that almost as much as I care about being safe. So this is a terrible tool for cutting with a knife. We're going to use something as close to this as we can. At school we have some that have flip up guards, which are great, because then I feel like your fingers are completely protected for inexperienced people. They cost a fortune, but you know, we're working on it. Okay. Now to use this tool, I want to line up the straight edge, and remember, the numbers don't matter, it's just the edge. I want to line it up so that it's right up to the line without going over. So I don't want to cut in the middle of the line because I don't want the line to show up in my final piece. But I also don't want to cut inside the line more than I have to, because then I might be cutting off part of my drawing that I need to line up with the other pieces, because ultimately all of these pieces are gonna need to line up together. So I'm gonna put this as far up as I can, and I know this is almost impossible to see on a video, but I see only like a tiniest hair of white before I go to my thick line that's printed on the paper, and I'm gonna cut that thick line of white. So I'm gonna always pull towards myself, but diagonally. So my body is right here. I am oriented this way, and I have the line that I'm cutting oriented diagonally, so that I'm starting at the middle of my body basically, and I'm going off to the right because I'm right-handed. If you were left-handed, you would want to do the opposite, okay? If I accidentally slip with this knife, I do not want it to be aiming at my stomach or at any other part of my body. I want it to slip completely away from where my body is positioned. I also want to make sure that there's nobody behind me, that there's nobody that I could accidentally cut. I don't want to be too close to anybody. I don't want somebody to be able to bump me with their drawing board as I'm cutting with mine. So please be careful of each other and of yourself. You got to look out for your safety, and then try to be paying attention also to other people and make sure that you're not cutting into them or putting them in danger in any way. Okay, and in terms of what I'm cutting on, now my board is bigger than yours, but I am cutting on a masonite board, but I am on the wrong side. Please do not cut on the good side of my masonite boards, because these are drawing boards. They're supposed to be extremely smooth surfaces. Mine's bigger than yours. But you're gonna cut on the fuzzy side. I don't care how much you cut on the fuzzy side. That's not gonna hurt anything. You can make a million cuts in this and it's totally fine. So just please, please make sure it's on the fuzzy side, and watch your neighbors. Make sure they're on the fuzzy side if they need a reminder. Okay, so I'm gonna start above where I wanna actually start cutting. And then I wanna put a medium amount of pressure. I don't wanna put so much pressure or force that I lose control of my knife. Okay, so I don't wanna go so lightly that it's not gonna do anything, but I also don't wanna put so much pressure that I'm like forcing this down, because then I lose control. That's where my knife is gonna like cut up. This is a very thin piece of paper, but if I were cutting mat board or something a little bit thicker, it can be very tempting to just bear down on it to get all the way through. But a piece of mat board or a thick piece of cardboard, don't bear down, cut twice. And that's a different skill for another video. Okay, so I'm gonna start above where I wanna cut. I'm gonna move down, and I'm gonna just, with a moderate amount of pressure, I'm gonna move along until I'm past where I wanna cut, and then I have this nice, clean square, okay? This is the type of cutting that gives me the most control. A scissors, as much as you feel comfortable with the scissors, is not going to give you enough control to really make straight edges that are perpendicular to each other in a square. So I'm gonna do a couple more of these, and you can get started and do this with me. Like I said, I'm not gonna cut all 15 because that's just a lot of watching me cut. Here, let me get up to the center here. And I don't think that's necessary, but I'm gonna do this a couple of times while you start, and that way you can look back up at me and see how to adjust if you feel uncomfortable, okay? Now, I'm gonna leave these together because these should be pretty much straight next to each other. And it's fewer times that I have to line up this straight edge if I can cut two lines at once. So that's exactly what I'm gonna do in this situation. I'm gonna cut this sideline, both of these with one cut. So I'm gonna make two lines with one cut because I've got two squares here that are eventually gonna get cut apart. So instead of having to turn this so many times, it's a little bit more efficient. And it's just also another way to double check that I'm holding my blade straight and my straight edge straight, because it's got to line up with both of them. So it's like a little bit of a challenge to make sure that things are straight. Okay, see, my knife just jumped up onto my metal ruler there because I wasn't paying attention. Okay, and I have a discard pile over here that I'm gonna sort into feet and hands eventually. Okay, so double check, make sure that you're safe, things are lined up. Now you spend a lot of time on these drawings, so it's better to double check your cuts than it is to mess up. You want things to be nice and straight. Craftsmanship is going to matter a lot in this final product. We want to make sure that everything looks good. Okay. The crispness of these edges is going to help make this final piece look really nice. Okay, So my original blade wasn't really dull. I'm gonna switch this back because this blade is clearly dull because it's ripping the corner of my paper. So I'm gonna flip my knife, flip my blade here. See, I think it's not quite lined up in here the way it should be because it doesn't want to close. Okay, there we go. So I can do all the lines going in one direction so I don't have to flip my paper. See, that's better. Stopped ripping the corner. Oh, and I can show you. So when I was using the dull side of the blade that had already been flipped, you can see it just like ripped that last piece off because there just wasn't enough left over here to hold it. And so I ended up with a corner that's not clean, which doesn't look good. You don't want that. Ask for a sharp blade if both sides are dull. But my original side that before I flipped it, that was sharp, so I flipped it back. All right. Okay, so now all of mine are done. I'm gonna get rid of the paper scraps that I made. Get those completely out of the way. So I'm discarding the photocopy side on the drawing page, and I'm also discarding the scrap. I don't need any of that. And then I have this stack of 15 squares. So I'm gonna sort it into feet and hands. I think that's it. I think so. Okay. Now, I'm going to take my black piece of paper. So this is designed to go on a 9x12. Oh, one more thing I wanted to tell you. So I have this scrap paper. And one of the things, if I was dealing with graphite, especially if I had a lot of graphite that was rubbing onto the back of my straight edge, which is very possible, this is something else, but I can wipe this and dry it every so often to keep graphite from just depositing and depositing, but I can also put a scrap piece of paper over top as I'm cutting. And that way, when I'm smearing this on here, which I don't want to do, I always want to lift up and then put down, and lift up and put down. I don't want to like be pulling this and scraping it on here because then your graphite's going to get a mess. It's also a good way if you have something else to get dirt on your paper or just scrape up the surface of something that you want to keep pristine. So it's a good habit to lift your straight edge up and then place it down carefully. But feel free to use scrap paper in between your straight edge and your graphite piece. That might help. Okay, so we're gonna get this big piece of paper and we're gonna put this together like a puzzle. Okay, let's see. Some of these overlap. There's the end of the whetstone. And you're going to have a little bit of choice here in terms of what overlaps what. So I put this one over top of this one, but I could do the opposite if I wanted to. Okay. And these pieces are actually going to go all the way down here. And I need these to line up. All of this needs to line up. Okay, I think I've got a little cutout here that is, this doesn't actually build in, I think. And these butt up against each other. Okay. And then the finger goes here. And the end of the whetstone goes right here. Okay, so once I have these lined up where I want them, I'm gonna glue them down. So I need a glue stick. And I've got to start somewhere. I'll start here, and once one of these is fixed, then I can bump the rest of these up next to each other. I'm gonna leave this side open because I want to be able to put this one underneath. So I'm gonna bump these up together. And line this one up best I can. Okay, let's see. Do I want this to move over? Maybe I want this one to move over. That seems fine. Okay, and this one is going to overlap a lot because I got the tip of that finger and I have this. Okay, it's not too bad. Uh-oh, I get a glue stick on the front. That's not what I want to do. Okay, so some of this doesn't exactly line up, but I decided to line up this tip of the finger. And then this one is gonna go in here like this. So I'm trying to make a continuous line in my mind and make sure that this is lined up. So there we go. And again, I could put this one on top. Okay. Now we're gonna do the foot. Try to turn it. I think you guys can see it if we do it like that. Okay. So these are gonna go together. And this I know is gonna be the top because that's the end of the ankle. And then this I think joins with this. These two are going to connect right here. And this one is going to join with that one. So these are going to connect. These can go one on top of another. Whatever your best pieces are, those are the ones that you really want to expose the most. So think about, like, if this one's nicer than this one, then put this one on top. If it's vice versa, do the opposite. Okay, so here it all is together. And it's tricky because since this is a drawing and not a photocopy, the way they line up can be a little less than accurate here. So I'm gonna overlap this and see if I can get it to work. Okay, so I want to look at the edges and see how they're lining up. Could put this one on top. And this is where you can see the different value pencils matter. Like, did I use a dark enough value pencil to match this to this? So I don't think I did. I'm gonna put this one underneath because I think that one's the mismatch. So I wanna watch, is this matching up? And then this wants to match up right here on the edge. And then the foot, let's see, this might overlap just a little bit. Yeah, that looks better. Okay, so then I'm gonna glue this down, and these are gonna be my final pieces. And they'll look a little bit distorted because they're hand drawn, but a photocopier can't imitate it. And thanks for being here. And let me know if you have questions. And I'm excited to see your final work.